through public education and outreach, advocacy, negotiation, protest, and litigation, Barbara has advanced the idea that the state and federal government must recognize the Sacramento-San Joaquin Bay Delta as part of California's natural heritage, deserving of protection, while ensuring the inclusion of the Delta's environmental justice communities in planning and government processes. And I would really suggest that people spend a lot of quality time with the Restore the Delta website, which has her reports that she has co-authored, Fate of the Delta and Climate Equity and Seismic Resilience for the San Francisco Bay Delta Estuary. I could go on, but wonderful to have you here, Barbara. Take it away.
Yeah, you're way too kind, and thank you very much. Restore the Delta isn't one person. Restore the Delta is an incredible team of people, and I am lucky to have a wonderful team that I work with, and a new young team that we're training that's perhaps even more impressive. I also, because of the opening comment that Deirdre made, want to make a few things really clear. We don't just work on environmental justice policy at Restore the Delta. We've authored those reports, but if people go back and look at the history of our work, we do an incredible amount of media work in California. There were some years that we were behind up to 3,000 printed media stories a year on California water policy and the tunnel, water conditions, and we write substantive comments, and we have for years. We have been involved in all the commenting, all the water processes before the water board, not only for California Water Fix, but the triannual review for Region 5, the selenium fight, harmful algal blooms. We work with 8 state agencies and have a team of people under contract working with the state and the University of North Carolina collecting data on that front. We have done substantive work on economic analysis, fishery analysis. We ran an EPA initiative here in Stockton for about half of the Delta that involved 56 state and federal agencies, working on various cleanup campaigns. And you need to have me back because we are leading an effort. I'm going to be a speaker at an event with Stanford University here in Stockton on the 29th on the challenges for communities on proposed carbon capture sequestration projects. And the Delta is ground zero for carbon capture sequestration. It's kind of scary when you're working with a group of college students, university students, and you have to write the 32 questions that the Department of Energy never considered with EPA, but we did it. And now we're really pushing because the way the process is being put together for the state and for the Delta, and I think for other communities, is frightening. It's frightening what they haven't considered. And so we're in the process right now of partnering with SF Estuary Institute, whom we also worked with this year on HABs related research, to begin a study on the potential for carbonic acid leaks as a result of carbon capture sequestration. So we do a lot of projects. We don't even put everything up, I think, on the internet that we're engaged with or in every newsletter. For instance, I have interns who have been organizing substantially in the south end of the Delta right now with a new organizer because we are at ground zero for the biggest flood threat in California in South Stockton. We have been working in partnership with SJAFCA, which is our local flood protection agency. I want to stress something. I'm not just emphasizing San Joaquin County in our work, but San Joaquin County is about half of the Delta.
Mhm.
And what has happened over the last 15 years with the fight is, and we've just been going through the environmental justice data, is that the environmental justice population has actually shrunk in other communities. It shrunk in the North Delta, it shrunk on the Contra Costa side. But the environmental justice community around Antioch is still significant. It is also significant still in West Sacramento. It actually grew in Sacramento in numbers, and it grew significantly in San Joaquin County. So there is a method to our madness on why we are prioritizing those issues, because not only are we at ground zero for all that green toxic algae, which you see floating behind me in the photo, we are also at ground zero for all these carbon capture sequestration projects, because most of them are slotted for San Joaquin County. And with the new eastern alignment for the tunnel, it's pretty horrific. We also are doing things a little bit differently on how we're handling comments and campaigning. People are stuck in how you do a campaign from 15 years ago. And post-COVID, it's not the same world. And I think you all know that. We have made some really calculated decisions because of safety issues. We're not necessarily, in just the way the world has been, we're not really comfortable, bringing up dozens and dozens of people to the Capitol for rallies when we don't even think we can safely protect people between gun violence and COVID right now. So we are really keeping things online, and instead we're running a symposium the middle of October with a couple of dozen social, environmental, and water justice advocates that we have been training for the last 3 years through multiple organizations, for them to voice and articulate the future of the Delta. We think it's the most important place to put our efforts right now, because so much of the Delta advocacy community is aging out. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that we are going to institutionalize Restore the Delta. We were almost left to die after the Twin Tunnel fight ended, because everybody saw us as expendable. And we received very little help from our donor community during COVID. And if we had not taken on this other work and started really putting efforts into training for the future, we would have not made it. So I am going to make sure over the next 5-6 years that Restore the Delta is institutionalized while we carry on this fight. And our youth, besides articulating visions to the state and to the federal government on a regular basis, the one thing we do an awful lot of these days is, I think we've taken every government official out for a tour recently in the last couple of years, and I have more of them coming up. We really are focusing quite a bit on how we're building out our comments for the EIR and what it is that we're going to be focusing on for the tunnel. And feeding into that, and is as important, it is the effort we are leading right now with Stanford Law Clinic, Save California Salmon, the Winnemem Wintu Tribe, Shingle Springs Miwok, and Little Manila Rising, on the path work that we're doing on the voluntary agreements. We started this work close to a year ago. We filed an amicus brief supporting the state water board's legal right to issue curtailments on large industrial agriculture players regarding their ability to access water when our rivers are dying, and the estuary is dying, and San Francisco Bay is dying. And that work, if you go to our website, is very much grounded in the history of genocide, how land was taken, tribal water rights, land back, tribal water rights for tribes. It covers extensively how tribal communities, including the Yokuts, whose land I sit on in San Joaquin County, were all removed, and then it goes even further to show how multiple generations of immigrants through redlining and the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Asian Exclusion Act were kept from being able to purchase land in the Delta as well. But yet these are all the historic communities that are living right around this polluted water that you see in the back of my screen. So we get all the environmental degradation, but we never get a say in anything. So while I know I'm not the face of environmental justice, our organization is a majority minority organization now. We are 25% LGBTQ, and there's only 3 white hetero people on our staff, and we're all aging out over the next couple of years. So we're very happy about the crew and the group that we're training to take our place, because they actually reflect the community. Some of our long-term efforts also, besides what we're working on, you know, in terms of these struggles and these fights, we did this amicus brief. We have a petition in front of the water board. We have a request for consideration, and we're making decisions internally right now if we're going to be filing complaints federally with the EPA around Title VI and discrimination practices, and doing that with there may be tribal litigation that moves forward without Restore the Delta, because we're not a tribal organization, of course, so we wouldn't be a party to that. And so we're putting our pieces together around the voluntary agreements, because the voluntary agreements, if you go through the EIR, are dealt with and not dealt with as a tool for them eventually putting water into their plan for the Delta Tunnel. We're also doing extensive work on air quality and greenhouse gas emissions for this EIR round with our good friends and partners from CVAC. I think some of you have worked with Dr. Catherine Garopa over the years. And this, I've been working with her extensively here in Stockton, especially on the carbon capture issues. So we have brought them in to be the specialists for us this time on handling that part of the EIR. They have some phenomenal contractors, scientists who work on those issues. So it helps beef up our work a bit. What else can I tell you? Off right now, what we're working on. The HABS work that we're doing right now has just been fascinating. I've had a team of 5 people who have been testing water quality throughout San Joaquin County, rural and urban, every week since April. We skipped a couple weeks with heat and COVID, unfortunately, but we've collected quite an amount of data this year on how HABs are forming and at what levels. And that work's interesting because it's not just strip testing. We're actually collecting water samples that are being analyzed by UC Santa Cruz. And then the second part of that job, and sadly, I'm not going to have this data in time. We thought we were going to have it, but it's not going to be finished until the end of November or beginning December by the labs. We are in a very important program with the University of North Carolina, where we are doing the analysis on how harmful, I'm laughing because my cat does that usually. I love it. We're doing an analysis of the relationship between how cyanotoxins and harmful algal blooms either evolve and become particulate matter 2.5 or attach to it. So all the toxins that come off the green algae waters you see behind me become airborne, and they travel 7 miles into our community. And in particularly, they land in a part of San Joaquin County that is an AB 617 community. So those are, 4th highest rate of asthma in the United States. Life expectancy is already 18 years below the other half of the county. So these are significant issues. We are on the verge of we are on the verge in the Delta of what we've seen in other places in California historically, of water pollution becoming significant air pollution problems. So that gives you a scope for our work, and why we're really focusing, and what I'm going to mostly talk with you today is about, you know, really how to tackle the EIR and a couple of things that we have. I'm trying to see if I can find this for you. A couple of things that we are really kind of focusing on. Let's see, that isn't coming up so easily.
Barbara, would you mind giving us a kind of quick and dirty history of the tunnel project as we, and then finally the version of
this one?
The same, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could find it in state water records going all the way back to 1951 or 52 as the peripheral canal. I think that was the first. I'm loving you all. You got all cat people. This is so cool. Okay. Anyway, 1951 or 1952 was the first time it was really brought into focus, and it's always been seen as the incomplete process, the incomplete link of moving water from the north for the state water project. You know, the peripheral canal fight, which went down with a referendum in 1981. That was in 1981, was for a peripheral canal, which in many ways was a much better project than anything that is being put forward right now. And I would say this version is even worse than the water fix version. I mean, BDCP was bad. So fast forward, I wasn't involved in CalFed. It was the tail end of CalFed. I was working at the Planning and Conservation League. Dan was in CalFed. Dan Bacher was, not me. So it was at the end of that the blue ribbon process started under the Schwarzenegger administration. And they were discussing building a channel. In fact, when we made our documentary so many years ago in 2012, it was a channel still. And then they came up with the twin tunnels, which was part of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. That had 150,000 acres of habitat. We were branded as hating habitat because we fought so hard on the habitat part, but habitat without water doesn't work. And we have a repeat of that in today's LA Times. Then after BDCP, it was reconstituted as California Water Fix. Twin tunnels with basically very little, no habitat. They really just made it a water project. And it became too costly. They, you know, everybody here, Dan, Deirdre, the public, I mean, we put the word out. We had 10,000 comments go in during that last drive with the petitions and the relentless kind of protests and advocacy. There are people who think, oh, well, you should do that all over again. But I think most of you know, probably from doing your own advocacy work, people psychologically are not in the same place right now. You know, when we go to do something, we're very, very happy if we can mobilize X amount of people, because survival has just become so tough for so many people. And so, like I said, when we do media work now, and if we're doing something, we call the media to our smaller event, just so that we can protect people and protect spaces presently. And trust me, I'm not being dramatic about this. We had our office vandalized up to the tune of $50,000 in June. So the world is really tough right now. We didn't have to pay for that, but you know, it's tough. I have to take care of people. Anyway, so after Waterfix died, Newsom said he was going to continue with the single tunnel. When he went that route, we said, and I did fulfill for the most part serving on the stakeholder engagement committee with the Design Construction Authority. That's the design unit for the water contractors, state water contractors, to build the tunnel. And it wasn't because of capitulation. I treated it pretty much like a really good union negotiation. You want something, we don't want something. Let's sit here and talk in earnest and see if we can make something that actually works. It was not a good process. And I don't even blame it's funny, my least amount of my anger is with the water contractors in some strange way. I found that process was a really awful process because of the Department of Water Resources. Every time we brought up major issues about construction or operation, they would just bag it for the environmental impact report. And it was at the penultimate meeting about a year ago. And I was recovering from cancer at that time. I went in for that last penultimate meeting for their whole process. And I was asking them questions about air pollution because I knew they were using data that was too old from the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution District. And because of work I had done locally, and if you follow air quality issues, the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution District is on the verge of being disbanded because it has failed to enforce air quality laws for 30 years. So I couldn't get a straight answer from them about the data or if they were going to go back and address the data questions that we had around construction. And I just gave up. I left that meeting and I wrote a letter and I said, look, we did this in earnest. We did it in good faith. We don't agree with you, but you're not solving the big problems. And so, that was about a year ago. The EIR dropped the end of July. We've watched really bad things happen, just like your fish kills over in San Francisco Bay. We have cyanotoxins in parts of the Delta that are 200 times over safe levels this year. We have a bloom that has died off and come back repeatedly at Frank's Track with the False River barrier that's in place there. I have staff going out. We've also been collecting, besides HABS data, we've been collecting temperature and salinity data this year in multiple locations. And we are working with a lovely, lovely 90-year-old resort owner and fisherman near Walnut Grove, who has recently observed the Sacramento River is actually in reverse flows between Ileton and Walnut Grove, which is terrifying during high tide, low tide. You can see this is where I get confused. I have to call the science staff. I think the problem is during high tide. I want to say during high tide anyway. And the salinity is very high at the gauges there right now. So we have people actually going out to capture video exactly of what's happening in the next week or so. So conditions have deteriorated in the Delta. HABs have spread. We have them in all over Contra Costa County and San Joaquin County now. I've heard of reports up at Stone Lakes Wildlife National Refuge, which is a sacred space for the Shingle Springs Miwok. And we have people who are doing some drone work on that for us presently, because it's a little hard to get access and to get into exactly where we think it's happening. The tributaries into the Delta, everything from the Klamath on down is in terrible shape with fish kills all over. We understand that
So you're a police sergeant.
we understand that from the Run for Salmon that they spotted multiple dead salmon floating around the confluence of the Sacramento and the Feather this past few days. So I think the problem is much deeper and wider through the watershed than we all realize. So that's kind of the history of the tunnel. It kind of takes us up to where we are.
Would you feel comfortable fielding questions at this point?
Well, I want to give you a couple more facts about what we're finding in the EIR first, okay?
Right.
If you go take a look at our Twitter feed or at Facebook or Instagram, We have some interesting analysis up. The current water fix project on average would be operable according to DWR's analysis 42% of the time. And so my very creative young crew, I thought this was great. They decided to compare it to a beer. It is twice the calories and less filling. That means twice the amount of money for half the water. The tunnel, according to their ultimate operating conditions, would only be used 154 days out of the year. Now, you know, if you start doing the economics, they're saying it's $16.5 billion. That's hogwash, because I'm watching inflation on that number came at 2019 from 2019 work. And we're watching inflation on flood control projects right now go up 12% annually. I mean, our inflation rate has been high. It's coming down, thank goodness. But construction inflation's been even higher. So, you know, construction inflation's running about 12%. So by the time they would get done with permitting, I think they'd probably easily be at 25, 28 billion out the gate. And then, of course, once you put the loans in, you're looking at double. So, you know, you're going to end up with a $50 billion tunnel that's going to capture even less water. But here's the other piece that was really disturbing to us. When you look at their analysis, except for either January or They think their highest water month, their second highest water month is going to be July. Now think about this. And they think they're going to be using the tunnel for greater amounts of exports for May through August. Well, you know what that is? It's HAB season. And in California, we have no state standard at the water board for harmful algal blooms. We have no broad scale mitigation plan, because this isn't just a Delta plant problem. It's happening up on the Klamath. It's happening in our reservoirs. It's happening in rivers and lakes all over the state. And it's going to get much worse with climate change. So they think they're going to export, you know, more water during those months. So then we started asking ourselves, why? Why do they think they're going to take so much water then? And we, with our partners, figured out it's because they're banking on water that they think they're going to put in Sites Reservoir, their other project. But here's the problem. Sites Reservoir just got a kind of kick in the teeth from the state water board, because they couldn't prove to the water board where are they getting the water to put in the reservoir. So all these projects are still spinning together. And then when we looked at the data that they're using, the historical hydrology and the whole CalSIMS 3 model, they are basing it on a historical hydrology that runs from 1995 through 2013, throwing in some extra dry periods for good measure. We have already worked through the majority of the climate change and modeling work, and we're not going to spend a lot of time critiquing modeling. We think it's a waste of money because the whole thing is built on a bad premise. There is no analysis of aridification. There is no analysis of change in soil conditions. And because there is no analysis by the state of how temperatures and temperature modeling for ambient air temperatures is going to impact agriculture, the numbers aren't right. You know what happened this week. Even if you're not watering your lawn, I had to go water my trees and my flowers a lot more. Why? Because things were going to die this week if we did it, right? So there is none of that in the analysis. And so as best as we can tell on the drought front, the assumptions, the underlying assumptions and the premises are just all wrong. And so that's a real problem. And then just as much on the flood front, DWR isn't being serious about flood impacts. Now, the project isn't supposed to solve that. That's supposed to come with flood control plans. And then we hear sorry excuses through the back door from DWR, like, oh, we're so sorry we couldn't get more money to you for flood control. You know, $400 million is going into this current budget for really good flood control projects in the San Joaquin Valley. We're not against them, and they do help us to an extent. So they capture flows upstream on the San Joaquin. But you know what? There were no dollars allotted for the most dangerous flood point for getting that project finished. Those projects finished in San Joaquin County. I have 17,000 homes that sit behind a 20-foot level levee differential, and is the #1 area, according to the 4th climate change assessment by the state, that is going to backfill with water with arc storms on the San Joaquin River side. On the Sacramento River side, their analysis is just nonsense about sea level rise, because they're saying that their project is going to be safe from sea level rise because of the kind of, I want to call them like sandbars, for lack of a better word, a shoal that is at a higher level north of Rio Vista. And we're kind of all laughing about that because what it looks like DWR didn't really analyze was what inundation could potentially look like on the Sacramento River side with climate change, and because you have had so much silt build up for the North Delta towns along the Sacramento River. Boats have been running aground all the way up to the confluence of the river on the Sacramento River side. What the flood levels that they're predicting from downstream storms are just unrealistic. Well, if they're that unrealistic and that much silt is going to be carried, that means those intakes are essentially going to be inoperable. So the whole thing is being sold as a climate change project. And, you know, right off the bat, it's a climate change project if it operates in these really optimal conditions. And what are we seeing that's happening with the weather? Nothing is optimal. Nothing is consistent. Nothing is the same. In fact, I would argue there's a greater lack of flexibility. They claim they're getting flexibility from it, but there's a lack of flexibility, and it's truly a hothouse flower climate project. So it is what it is. We've dubbed it a 1995 project for 2022, and it's certainly not going to solve the climate challenges that we believe will happen in the Delta, in the Bay, in our rivers, and for all of California.
What advice would you give to folks who are perhaps being guided into the weeds for the first time ever, in terms of, you know, commenting on the DEIR, how to approach it, how to best prepare?
This is what we did. We put an alert up. We are going to send out some talking points. But the reason I haven't been jumping up and down with that is because we don't want to just run a bumper sticker campaign, you know, stop the tunnel. We don't want to do that. And we don't want 10,000 people doing that, because it just kind of feeds the other side. We want people to kind of be thoughtful. And so the alerts that we have sent out and that are up on our website really walk people through, read the summary, read DWR's guide on how to read the EIR. And then this is what we're recommending to people. Take a chapter that interests you. Don't do the whole thing, okay? It is 20,000 pages once you put all the appendices in. read a chapter that makes sense to you and read the appendices. And you really don't have to be a complete expert. You just have to be a good reader. I mean, if you are a good English student, you will do well with this, because the contradictions between what's written in one chapter and the appendices are so profound that if you're a reasonably educated, intelligent person, good reader, it's going to become really clear to you. And we are just kind of astonished at some of the contradictions that we're seeing. And that is really our best advice. I am going to be, this piece that we did put out Friday night, we're going to be sending out to people again with the numbers. I have another chart that we will be sending out, and we have bits and pieces of information that we're going to put out for people, but primarily, I think that's the best way to track it, even internally, because you have to understand something. We're burnt out. We're still burnt out from COVID, and we've been doing all these other projects trying to get ready for the future, but we're also it's kind of traumatic for us to have to go back and work on this again. There's no way around that. There's no happy warrior about this. So we're not going to pretend to be what we're not. One of the things, I'm just looking for something I wanted to read to you. Hold on a second. So even internally, we've really broken up who is doing what work. How many, what chapters, and then just meeting weekly to put people up, because right now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people working on the document. So we are just kind of taking it piece by piece. We are focusing on water quality operations, climate change, flood control, sustainable ag, then that kind of the economics that go with agriculture. We're not touching the fishery science, and we're focusing on HABs. We're not going to touch the fishery science, because between Baykeeper and NRDC and CSPA, there's no need to. So we don't believe that everyone should kill themselves. We think it's really smart. Here's one thing I do want to read to you, though. Appendix 6A shows that Alternative 5 will deliver 35% more exports to the State Water Project table. State Water Project Table A contractors than they would under the no project alternative in 2040 in dry years and critical years. All the seniors in both the State Water Project and Central Valley Project will retain their supplies in dry critical years too. Westlands will see a slight increase in deliveries over the no project alternative from 58,000 acre feet to 68,000 acre feet. Their contract demand amount is 1.15 million acre feet. Back to seniors for a moment. That means senior water right holders. The modeling doesn't account for an event like the SAC settlement contractors taking an 82% cut this year. This analysis suggests they will be kept whole in all future droughts, as will Feather and San Joaquin senior contractors. There is so much ignored here, it is astonishing. And one more thing, Barbara, approximately State Water Project surplus water, Article 21, will increase with frequency of delivery from 53% to 73% of the time with the tunnel in 2040. And we are just rolling around laughing with what water, unless you just destroy everything north of Sacramento. But who knows if it will even be there. So like I said, we are going after the major premises, because the aridification science we see as a major failure.
Okay, thanks. We have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with Jean Tepperman and then Bill Pinkham.
Jean, I can't hear you yet.
Jean, you're muted.
Sorry. Okay. So that was all really helpful, but it would help me get oriented toward the issues if I had some understanding of what your basic vision for what ought to happen is. Like, would you like to have no connection at all between the Delta and the water system in the San Joaquin Valley and all that? Would you like to just no tunnel, no chat? Or if you think there should be some connection, what should be the basic principles guiding how that connection works?
None of this has changed in 16 years. You can't divert more than 25% of the fresh water out of an estuary and have it maintain health. If the unimpaired flows coming into the Delta are being reduced by climate change, you can't share more than 25% of what it is. And that is all there is to it. I mean, if the world worked and I could redo everything in the world, would we be exporting all this water? No, but it is what it is. And we're never going to get out of exporting water. And I don't know about you. I don't want babies in Los Angeles being sick and not having water and not having sanitation. Okay. That's not the end goal, but we've got to get down to a sustainable amount of water that can be exported. And we've said this for years, except the numbers have gone up. I mean, when we were fighting this 6 or 7 years ago, we said you need to retire 350,000 acre feet of water out of the San Joaquin Valley or farmland, excuse me. And then we could all get by. But with what's happening with climate change and as bad as groundwater situation is because they've overplanted almonds, it's more like 1 million to 1.5 million acres of farmland that need to come out of production. And, you know, here's the problem too, because we work with groups throughout the San Joaquin Valley. This isn't me. There's a blog I wrote a week ago. Wade Crowfoot pretty much admitted that there's a lot of farmland that's going to go out of production in a CBS interview. Here's the scoop. There's no just transition for those small farm towns. Not for the farm workers, not for the middle class workers who work in these farm economies in the valley. And, you know, my argument is whether you got to put cattle ranchers out of business up on the Shasta River, or if there are some lands we're not going to be able to farm because of sea level rise in the Delta, or whether you've got farmland that can't produce any longer in California, bless you. The state is not preparing for a just transition for anybody. So we're always going to have to share water with Southern California. We need to have healthy rivers and a healthy San Francisco Bay. And that means the almonds and, you know, a good number of crops really, really are going to have to go. And we have to have a leader who is courageous enough to do that hard work. That's it. And there's also other opportunities to make things better. This is some of the side work we're doing. You know, what does it look like if you xeriscape every front yard in California? What happens when you replace every shower head with a low flow shower head, a low flow toilet, a low flow urinal? There are things that we could be doing so much better on the urban front, but still, you know, most of the demand is for agriculture and nobody wants to deal with that reality. And I think what's going to happen is, you know, we're going to fight this. We're doing our comments. I think aridification is going to knock out the project before Restore the Delta does, or any other group.
Wow. Okay, Mother Nature batting last. Do you feel comfortable with
first?
Or first, yeah. Last word at least. 3 more questions. And then I would really like to be able to give some time to our second speaker today, who is going to talk about kind of more localized impacts at the end of the Carquinez Strait and the Delta around Oakley. So we've got first Bill, and then Alex Spare. Steve, if we could, these could be kind of quick questions, and Bill, take it away.
Yes, well, thank you very much for speaking with us, and especially thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing. It's just Great.
Hey.
And I just have a informational question. As you may have heard, in the Bay, we've had this red tide, which is
Right.
a bloom of deadly algae caused by wastewater, bad wastewater management, human waste.
Right.
Has that extended into the Delta?
We have two different kinds of algae. And do you use Twitter, Bill, or Instagram?
No, I don't.
Okay, let me see if let me see if I could get this from my phone to I think it's on my phone. Hold on a second here. Want to see if I can get this in my phone into an email to you all so that you could grab these last two graphics that I've talked about. We did a really nice infographic that compares the red tide problem in the Bay to the green algae toxic problem in the Delta. Two different kinds of algae problems. The red tide algae, according to scientists who have tracked this for years in Baykeeper, and state officials, is really caused by lack of sanitation, improper discharge from all the wastewater treatment plants into the San Francisco Bay. You have lower water levels with tides right now in August, and you have extraordinarily hot temperatures. So that algae is not good for humans, but it is not as deadly for humans as the green algae that is behind me in the photo. But it's horrible for fish. And they're not sure if it's the bacteria from the algae or the dissolved oxygens from the algae that contributed to the fish kill. Maybe it's a bit of both. It's hundreds of thousands of fish. It's not a few thousand like in the newspapers, or 10,000. I understand that the fish are just sinking into the bay. And the teams that I'm working with are really concerned because we have such poor conditions up on the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. We don't know what's going to come, and through the Delta, what's going to come from where to replenish what is happening or the bay. Okay. And so we did this really nice layout. And here's the other misnomer. People are saying, well, it's flows, flows, flows. This is hard to explain, but your flows right now in the San Francisco Bay, not because they necessarily, how to explain this? Right now, the standards that are set for the San Francisco Bay for unimpaired flow are over 100%. And that is because of what water is going down the system to keep water fresh for exports in the Delta. It's the Delta that's really suffering on the flows, and particularly on the San Joaquin side where I am. Okay. So harmful algal blooms in San Joaquin County and Stockton. Here's what usually happens. This year was a little bit different. We usually get some really heavy rains in May or June. You get one storm that's always that outlier every year. It's not days of rain, but you get one big storm. And it flushes farm runoff from spring crops down into the Delta. And then about 2 days later, you hit 100 degrees because you get that one burst of hot weather every May, right? Or the first week of June. And so that sets the recipe up for the chain for the harmful algal blooms. Now, because we've had so many years of them, we are now surrounded by what they call benthic mats. And these are actually mats that are in the sediment in our waterways. And they kind of die off every winter, and then they come back every year. And then the worse they get and the bigger they get, the cyanotoxin breaks off, it floats away, it goes and hits another dead end in the Delta, and you have another harmful algal bloom. And that's why we have gone from 3 or 4 incidents a year when I started working at Restore the Delta, and now we're up to dozens of incidents. Okay. You have these benthic mats in all around San Joaquin County, in the South Delta, Discovery Bay, Antioch. Now we think we have one out of Frank's Tract. green, blue algae cyanotoxins. There are a number of different kinds of cyanotoxins, 10 of them. We've identified this last year with the samples that have gone to UC Santa Cruz. They kill dogs. They can kill a preschooler. They kill shellfish. They contaminate drinking water, and they denigrate and ruin irrigation water. So when they do die, they can cause the same dissolved oxygen problem like the red tide. And then, as I explained earlier, they can aerosolize, and then you have this tied in air pollution problem with as well.
Barbara, one more question, if we
Yeah.
could. Jan, could you unmute?
Gee, Barbara, there's so much today, and I've been following this since '09. Appreciate it.
You too.
We didn't touch on the salt intrusion, and I've been reading about these strawberry growers who are now switching to almonds. How do we stop people allowing people to plant more almond trees? I mean, it's crazy. And yeah.
I have thought for the longest time. Some people I've worked with here stopped me from doing it years ago, but I think we are thinking about it. I literally think we need to do like a guerrilla grocery store sticker campaign where we have people literally slapping stickers at grocery stores. I mean, it's kind of similar to the grape boycott, right?
Yeah.
You know, I almost think that's what it's going to take, but that's all I can say is I'm working on something with the media right now that I can't discuss that I think may help some of this. And the last piece of that is that I think nature is going to do a lot of these growers in. They're already pulling fields out. You have leaders at Westlands now that are looking at planting agave, which on one hand, it's a desert plant. On the other hand, let's appropriate Mexico's culture and take over their tequila export empire, you know, which just makes me sick to stuff my stomach in a whole different sort of way. So I think nature's going to get them before we do in some ways, unless you have the time and the resources and the money. You know, people forget, but to run an annual even guerrilla campaign without stickers throughout the state costs like $500,000 a year. You're going to put organizers and pay them a living wage and pay for all their travel.
Right.
People think we're just going to, yeah, it's like someone was telling me, oh, you better get the signs out. You better get the signs out. And I'm like, let's do the math here. The signs now with inflation cost $90. I've got COVID running through my ranks. I barely have an office that's big enough. How am I going to pay for all that shipping with it too?
Right.
You know, and finally, I just had to yell at someone and say, "You want all this? You go raise
do it.
$1 million."
What about the salt intrusion problem?
Well,
You know, if I may,
I know. Okay,
think
never mind.
that actually Paul Seger can address that. And Barbara, thank
Thanks,
you
Barbara.
so much. I think
You're
we
welcome.
could easily extend. We could be here longer. I know when you started out, you were not feeling so hot, and you have
Yeah.
certainly risen, more than risen to the occasion. I really applaud you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I was going to say something though. Let me get through the EIR.
Yeah.
November,
Okay.
December, we need to have the CCS conversation. And Dan, if you want to come as press, you should hit me up because that conference is going to be in Stockton after Jonas Minton's memorial, same day. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll see you later. Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Barbara.
Thank you.
Wow.
But Paul, let me briefly introduce you since I did not do it at the beginning. We have with us, and again, we're very lucky to have him with us, Paul Seger, who happens to be president of the board of directors of the Diablo Water District, head of the Delta group of the Sierra Club Bay chapter, and an all-around great guy and progressive activist in East County, in a region where there aren't too many progressives. So great to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I could definitely talk about tequila for the next 30 minutes. But we'll move forward Barbara was amazing. I was taking notes ever since I sort of became the president of the Diablo Water District. We've made it our goal to oppose the Delta Tunnel. We've submitted comments during the scoping. We are planning on not only submitting comments for the EIR, but we're also building coalitions, and we are currently working with other agencies in the area to sort of create a group of water providers that are going to be affected by being basically at the end of the funnel of all of the policies that are going to be made up and be put into place in order to handle this water fix that the state is proposing. You did ask me to put forward just a brief sort of idea or outline of let me see. Okay, can you guys see the Google Earth here? Did that show up on the screen?
Yet. No.
No.
Maybe it takes too much
There you
juice.
go. Yeah, there we are.
Okay, so yeah, just real briefly, just so that you know, and this is all sort of rudimentary stuff, but on the average, California receives about 200 million acre feet of water per year in the form of rain and snow. However, we rarely experience an average year. California has the most variable weather conditions in the nation, often fluctuating between extreme drought and extreme flood. 65% of that 200 million acre feet evaporates or is consumed by plants. About 11% flows into the Pacific Ocean and mixes with salt water. And the last 24% has to be shared amongst California industries, farms, cities, and the population. Of that 24% that's left, 40% of that water is coming from the Delta that is being used for the entire state of California. That's already a big pinch of our water supply. The Department of Water Resources, or DWR, created the State Water Project, or SWP, in the 1960s and 70s with the purpose of increasing statewide water and supply reliability. The SWP is a network of dams, canals, and pumping plants that store and deliver water to people, farms, and industry. So when you hear folks talk about California's water system is an engineering marvel, this is what they mean. The Delta drains a watershed that totals 40% of California's water. Federal, state, and local reservoirs store some of that water for flood protection, water supply, and environmental uses. But enough water must flow through the Delta throughout the dry months to repel salt water that pushes back inland from the ocean in San Francisco Bay. The reservoirs are used in part to help control salinity from reaching the Delta. So during drought conditions, there's not enough water in upstream reservoirs to push the salt water back, and it can contaminate the channels that supply the water to the CVP and SWP. So my goal today was kind of to get everyone to sort of see the Delta, and this is the Delta here, and this is all the water that we're receiving. And of course, a Delta is basically a funnel, and it all funnels right down. And if you look right into here, I've superimposed a map over this. Right here is the water district where we receive our water. This red line right here, I'm hoping you can see that. That's the Contra Costa Water Canal. That's where we get our water supply from. And if you look at it, you can see that the water that we're getting in from the Contra Costa Water Canal right here comes in from a place called Rock Slough. And that water is actually coming to the Rock Slough through the Old River. And that is coming from Frank's Tract. And so the idea that that Barbara just brought up, that we are getting the deadly algae blooms that are starting to proliferate very close to the mouth, right here, the mouth of the of Frank's Tract, is very, very concerning. And it's just another reason why we need to really take a fresh look at the Delta-Conveyance Project to make sure that we're receiving enough fresh water to keep the fresh water is what's going to keep the deadly algae blooms and keep the salt water from penetrating into the area. Another thing that Barbara mentioned is the drought barriers, and right here on False River, just before Little Frank's Tract, that's where we've put in the first and most famous of saltwater barriers. And it's, according to the state, there's not too many issues with it, but according to locals and data, there is. And what it does is it blocks the Delta smelt, which is a feeder species, from being able to migrate back and forth and get to their food supplies throughout the year. I guess now they're starting to put in these notches in the gates, and they're going to be using that as their reasoning for moving forward. So all that to say is Contra Costa Water District provides water to over 500,000 people in Contra Costa County. It goes, and this is only part of the canal, but this canal goes all the way through Pittsburgh, comes back around here to up through Concord, and finally delivers water to Martinez. So when you're talking about people receiving their water from the Delta, people in Martinez don't consider themselves being reliant on the Delta or even having to consider it very much at all. However, the opposite is true. Back in the water fix days, the Contra Costa Water District was one of the most aggressive and best models for opposing the twin tunnels, and whereby the state then made a deal with Contra Costa Water District that if you withdraw your opposition to the project, that we will make you whole, which means that somewhere around here, and we cannot find the drawings, and it is not referred to in the EIR at this point, they are going to create a further conveyance whereby the Contra Costa Water District will be pulling in fresher water from further up the Delta. Now that is another major impact that would not necessarily be a consideration if the Delta tunnels were not, if the Delta tunnel was not going to be built. Yet they don't feel that it's necessary to put this into the EIR or to account for that data. So kind of in conclusion of our points and what it is that we're trying to do. And I took down a gob of notes, and I'm going to have to hit Barbara back at some point and get her to speak to our group. We are planning on meeting next month with a joint meeting of the City of Oakley, the local sanitary district, Water Treatment District, our water district, and also Contra Costa County. We're going to try and bring Diane Burgess in and have her sort of solidify our project. And Contra Costa County has mentioned that they would like to work with us on putting together comments for the EIR against the tunnel. So what we're doing is we're really trying to build partnerships and sort of inflate our comments. And Shoshana, you know, from working with you and the great work that you're doing at East Contra Costa, trying to, you know, draw the attention to the drilling, which we're also using as part of our comments, the drilling for gas and oil, is that the bigger coalition of sort of local jurisdictions and municipalities that you can get together to all stand together, the stronger your point is, the more weight your argument's going to carry. I'm going to stop sharing that one. I'm going to jump on one more quick slide deck I've got here. And okay, tell me when you can see this. That's basically the same thing that you were looking at that wasn't part of the, that was actually overlaid onto the Google Earth. So I'm just going to skip through that part, and if it will let me. Okay, this is fun. Here's the current reservoirs. I actually put that up. I actually took this off the net last night. This is where we're sitting as far as capacity. If you look at these lines, where the lines are, that's where the average normal capacity is for all of our water reservoirs. So we're not looking too good these days. I just thought that was interesting. This is the size of the tunnel. This is the size of an average 6-foot man or woman, person, human species. And then this is going to be the size of the drilling, the cutting head. And this is going to be what they're going to be running under the delta for miles. And then there's going to be other outtake valves. Okay, let's move past that. Okay, here's a picture of the Contra Costa Canal as it runs through the area. Okay, so this is the part I wanted to show is, so East Contra Costa Integrated Regional Water Management, we are a group of 7 different organizations that are groundwater sustainability agencies. So we have the Byron-Bethany, which is basically Byron all the way out to basically into San Joaquin, Brentwood, the town of Discovery Bay, who is actually, they are at the mouth of Frank's Tract where it goes into Old River, and their only source of water is groundwater. And so we're very concerned about them. Then you've got Diablo Water, the City of Antioch, Contra Costa Water District. What is that? The Contra Costa County and East Contra Costa Irrigation District. And we're proposing that this group of us here together forge a union and have a very broad discussion. And this will take place next month, sometime early next month. And I'll definitely make sure that Sunflower Alliance knows about this, because the more public input that we get, the better, and the more effective we can be. And so with all that to say, the comments that we are basically going to be working on, and what Barbara was saying is there's so much material, is we're going to be talking about saltwater intrusion. We're going to be taking positions against the saltwater intrusion, climate change. They're definitely their numbers for sea level rise have been sort of what do you call it? They fished for what they were looking for, and that suits their science. and then water quality. And then we're going to bring up the ideas of, okay, well, if you have these contracts with Antioch and Contra Costa Water, of them being able to draw from a certain place further, if we build the tunnel, how many other projects do you have in the works that are going to be doing this? So what they're not really revealing is the cumulative effects of all of their promises of making water districts whole in their EIR. And so these are some angles that we're looking at. And then as far as the details and the data, we are going to bring in Ludolf Scalamini, and we have a couple of legal teams that are willing to help us out and look at some of the data and put together our comments. So that's kind of what I had to say. And it was just kind of wanted to bring it home that, you know, that local water agencies are going to be affected. And that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Paul, let's see, can we take down this screen and
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
we go.
no problem. Deirdre is back, good. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Questions, folks?
Or suggestions.
Or suggestions?
I know that I see a number of very that people that I admire, and I read your comments and words often. So we're always looking for a good angle, or if I may be, Deidre has been a saint and introduced us to some fabulous people that are going to be working with our teams and taking a position against the tunnel.
I wanted to say, Paul, I really appreciated your tying this in with the oil and gas drilling. And the State Water Project is one of the largest consumers of electricity in the state. And they're using the Lodi natural gas plant to ship water 300 miles south and over the desert. And they're saying that the entire reason for this is because if we have 5 degrees C of warming, we might have high sea level rise, and then we need the tunnel. But 5 degrees centigrade of warming will be catastrophic for the entire planet. And Dan Bacher covered it. I called, I said, you have got that, we need net zero. We need to go to zero fossil fuel footprint for the State Water Project. Right now they're talking about 2045. And no, they've got to get off it now. So.
You muted yourself.
And thank you. It's wonderful to work with you as always, Paul. And I do work with a lot of people in the Delta. I've advocated for climate adaptation that protects vulnerable populations and ecosystems. And the South Delta is where Paul is very climate vulnerable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen, would you like to mute? And also, would you please introduce yourself and the commissions and boards that you're involved with, because these are issues that you're pretty intimately involved with as well.
Oh gosh, water manners, and I've been a kayaker up the Delta and on the bay for 40 years, and I'm on the Hazmat Commission for Contra Costa County, and the sanitation district for Rodeo, and I take to heart these blooms of red tide and where it's coming from and sanitation waste, but I do have a question, because, and I know I'm downstream. Oh gosh, you guys have so informed us today. Thank you. But I am downstream but I am on the Carquinez Strait, and Phillips 66 has a once through cooling system. And you know, as there is continued salt intrusion, it's not quite there yet, but I'm wondering what other industries around Stockton and up the Delta might have that kind of technology. A once through cooling system for Phillips 66 is 40 million gallons per day. Bay water flushes through the system. It's like the radiator system, right? It cools down the refinery. But there's refineries upstream from me, Marathon, Shell, PDF. There's other, Benicia. What effect will this salt intrusion have for people who still continue to have a once through cooling system?
I don't have an answer, but I bet somebody on here knows something.
It scares me.
Absolutely.
It's terrible. And one of the things that people are talking about is desalination. Many desal plants up and down the Delta to handle this. And exactly what Deirdre said is it's an energy, it could turn into an energy nightmare. And we just need to make sure it's done right if that's a consideration or an alternative.
Mm-hmm. And there's a very large plant being built right now in Antioch, no? Yeah.
Yes, with no consideration for net zero.
Does Dr. Tom Williams have a direct response to Maureen?
You should call Steve first. He was ahead of me.
Yeah, I was about to do that, but thank you. Steve, you're on.
Well, I'm going to give my standard boilerplate suggestion as a union member, and that is that in opposing things like the Delta-Conveyance and maintaining the status quo, the developers and the big farmers or the big agriculture and or the other capitalist interests are going to drag the building trades out to say jobs, 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 and argue about how their livelihoods are threatened. And there are many union members, including myself, who do not support that perspective. And we need to build an organized group of people in the labor movement to support these campaigns and to show up as a counterpole to those claims that are going to be made at all the hearings and all the state levels. And it's not going to be easy because the leaders in the central labor councils and the leaders in a lot of the unions that are supportive of what we want are going to make the argument, well, we can't divide the House of Labor because elections this and so on and so forth, which means that by default, the loud building trades get basically their way. So, and of course, this is something I'm working on multiple levels, but I think that's got to be an essential part of the campaign. I realize it's kind of me sounding like a broken record, but I'm going to just put that out there because that applies to this as well. And it's, you know, working people's drinking water that's going to be affected as well. And one other angle to keep in mind is as the water situation worsens, as salinization happens, as aridification happens, there is going to be a fight over the remaining water. And of course, the rich are going to try and say, no, we need this water because it's essential economic activity. And so it's going to intensify the fight. So the more we get organized, the better prepared we're going to be for those times. So I'll end my rant there.
Indeed. Thanks, Steve. Dr. Williams. And Dan, did you have a direct response to that? Dr. Williams, just a little more patience. Yeah.
Yes, no problem.
Does anybody have a direct response to what Steve just said? And if not, Dr. Williams has the floor, and then Dan.
Okay, Dr. Tom Williams, LA 32 Neighborhood Council and Sierra Club Angeles chapter. However, I did teach at UC Davis and UC Berkeley, and I participated in the twin tube water fix which I think we helped kill it, Deidre. So I have some background with the Delta. The central issue for me is, where do they get the water rights to take the water and put it in the tunnel? Because most of the, quotes, normal flow water rights are already adjudicated and or assigned. And in one place, and one of the documents for scoping, I noticed they said they are going to take flood flow, which is not regulated under the same criteria as water rights for normal flow. But flood flows only come from November the 1st to April the 1st. So where are they going to get the water for the remaining part of the year to feed, let's say, 5 million acre feet per year? And one of the problems I've seen in the document, the EIR document, is they keep talking about cubic feet per second, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, up to 7,000. Well, having built tunnels for water supply and for other things, such as LA Metro Rail, the friction losses when you go to 7,500 and a 40-foot diameter pipe get rather horrendous, and you have to start pumping at the Bethany station. So I think there's some real detail problems, but especially for Paul, hey, whose water rights are they going to get? Are they going to get them from the State Water Project for normal flow, or are they going to have to take flood flow only? And that's a major issue as to when do they have it? And, oh, there may be some induced development because there are some issues in the Sacramento Valley as to building new flood control dams. And they will, quote, divert the flood flows during the winter time and then release them perhaps for the tunnel during the summertime. So water rights are a major issue. Oh, by the way, there's very little oil being produced or having been produced in the Delta area. And it's mostly gas. There are still active gas production facilities. And remember, it's also a potential source for carbon dioxide injection into the ground. So it might say there's some issues as to subsidence, uplift, and there's a lot of steel casings in the soil that I hope they don't run into one with a tunneling machine. It gets very nasty very quickly. That's all.
It's Deja Dan, I just wanted to, so I did work very closely with Delta attorneys in the water fix hearing. This is from attorney Michael Brodsky on Delta tunnel water rights. We commented, DWR has settled on 2 intakes number 3 and 5, both located adjacent to this low-income minority community of Hood. DWR believes that it has existing water rights at these locations, and therefore its water board process would be a petition for a change in point of diversion. If it locates the intakes anywhere else, its water board process would be the initiation of a new water right, a somewhat higher bar to pass. So I believe Dr. Tom Williams is right, but DWR's, the permit that was issued by the water board in decision 1275 in 1968 does specifically mention a right to divert up to 10,000 CFS on the Sacramento River, anywhere between Oroville and the Delta, and specifically mentions the town of Hood as a possible point of diversion because they were considering a peripheral canal then. So decision 1275, it's really important to look at it. It's really important to talk to the water rights attorneys about this. Thank you.
Yeah, Dan, please. You are muted. Dan, you're muted. Gotta unmute.
Okay.
Right.
This is kind of a follow-up on just what Dr. Tom Williams said, but I was going to talk about it anyway, is that the Frac Tracker Alliance in 2021 did an interesting analysis of oil and gas wells in protected state lands. And they turned up that there was a total of 178, almost half of which are idle. But of those oil and gas wells, there's a significant number, exactly 50 operational, mostly gas wells, that are permitted on California state lands in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And these are, you can see it up on the map. It shows exactly where they are. And he was kind of surprised because the thing is, in California, protection, when they say a protected area, whether that's a protected land area or a protected ocean area, okay, they are not protected from oil and gas drilling. And so he found that in the database, but it's important to consider, okay, those 50 wells on the Delta, okay, because if you're running all sorts of equipment and digging a tunnel and building the infrastructure, you have plenty of opportunities to cause a major gas leak or spill. And so this needs to be considered in the EIR. I mean, and this is the first time that this guy did it, Kyle Farrar, ever got a solid number for the number of active. Now, these are just on state lands. These don't include the ones on private lands. So I'm going to probably do some comments about this. That's all. But Dr. Tom Williams is right. You know, you got these active and inactive wells, and they could cause a major environmental disaster if you hit one of the lines that connects them, or you actually hit the well while digging.
Can this get any more sobering?
And just so you know, the way that I got originally turned on with this is to run for salmon, because one of the tribal members, Pomo ceremonial leader, he worked also as a driller for different types of wells, water wells, gas wells, oil wells. And he could see, just going down the Sacramento River from Sacramento to Pittsburgh, where the wells were and what type they were and what they were doing. Because he knew exactly. And I wouldn't have known it unless he pointed them out, and separate gas lines and oil lines that run through the river, some of which aren't very, very well marked.
I just wanted to say, Dan, I need to get this to you, but there's an amazing story there. So Mark Pruner, who's a volunteer firefighter for he's in the town of Hood, but for the North Delta, Metropolitan Water District had a history. They had the largest tunnel disaster in California history. It's the Silmar Tunnel. It's a long time ago, in the 70s, but they were tunneling through gaseous strata, and they didn't, and they got warned to stop, and they didn't, and there was a tunnel explosion, and 7 or 8 miners died.
Wow.
And DWR and Matt were actually warned that the gas wells were dangerous, and by an independent panel of reviewers. And the only reason I found this out was a Google accessed their FTP server, And I got access to this internal document and referred to this review. It was never publicly revealed. And they said, we recommend, since DWR has no experience with this, that they hire a petroleum engineer. DWR never did it, and they never dealt with that. Dr. Williams, and I talked with him, he's amazing, said they've got to go through old photos of where, because Dogger doesn't have good records. So anyway, I got it out on Cross of Mark Pruner, and DWR's attorneys were just sitting there in shock. And then Barbara Daly, who works in North Delta with an organization called North Delta Cares, she did a heroic job, and I helped her. She went to Scott Anderson at Sacramento News and Review, and they had this paper, it had Fire in the Hole, and it talked about the whole Sylmar Tunnel disaster and everything, and it was out during the water fix hearing. And I walked out of the Cal EPA building during the hearing, and somebody had taken all the Sac News and Reviews out of the corner thing. They were really embarrassed by it. But that was one of the things DWR just hadn't dealt with. So I'm going to put that article there, but it was one of the prouder moments of North Delta Cares. Was a small group. They had hardly any funding. I was asked to help do Friendly Cross, and I cross-examined them on it, and it brought out things that nobody had thought of. Department of Water Resources, I'm sorry, DWRs, we all call them, and it's water wonk jargon, I apologize. But yeah, it was Metropolitan Water District had the gall to dedicate a plaque to the workers that died in the Sylmar Tunnel disaster at the same time they were blowing off the warning. And they're still going to have to issue a permit. And Dr. Williams pointed out that it's a lot more expensive to get a permit to tunnel in gaseous conditions. He can tell you more about it, but there's special precautions they have to take.
Wow. We have some very serious expertise in this room. Thank you so much for showing up today. Any last questions? Take advantage of these folks. They're here now.
Yeah, Deidre, the one thing that I found is really hard to get the information on the active oil wells. I mean, it basically, well, it's a complicated thing, but the guy that does it full time. That's mainly what he does. He's had a hard time getting that information because it's not readily available. Did you ever come up with a figure of how many gas wells might be on the Delta? Oh, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Unmute.
Yes, there are maps. We did get some maps. I've got a blog post on this. So that this is the movie. It was called Fire Down Below. Mm-hmm. And I'll get my blog post on tunnel construction and gas wells. I hope they've got a lot more competent geologists. But yeah, I did gas wells. Dr. Williams is the real expert on this. I just work with him and, I bring things up. But let me.
I have a quick question to sneak in here, and then I'd love to hear from Dr. Williams. Do you guys not trust the data that's posted on the CalGEM site and their well finder site? Is that not?
This doesn't occur. It doesn't include the older stuff. Like they started requiring reports that they've been drilling, and a Rio Vista gas field was one of the largest fields. I think it was the largest gas field in California. And it's more depleted now, but I forget. I think it has, I have a history on my website.
Dr. Williams and then Paul and then
Yeah.
Maureen. And, you know, we can keep this going. If you know, if you guys need to leave, then thank you for having been here. But, you know, we can certainly go as long as you want. Honestly, there's still stuff to talk about here. Dr. Williams.
My contact is in the chat, so any questions you can send directly to me, email. I'm retired, so I can do anything I want. But anyway, you mentioned CalGEM and Well Finder.
Yeah.
Well Finder shows all of the wells that they know about. And one of our comments will be as to they need to do a review of all aerial photographs for the entire pipeline and tunnel route from, let's say 1940 to date. And that will show, especially in the 40s and 50s, that'll show derricks. And those are the ones that you have to worry about. The modern ones, CalGEM is probably pretty close on, and there are thousands of them in the Delta, gas wells. And the question is, are they plugged? Are they plugged effectively? Are they not plugged? Has the gas escaped already and maybe in the soil somewhere? Will you run into a gas well with a tunneling machine? Because what you see on the surface is not what happens underground. And a typical well can go out a half a mile from wherever its wellhead is located. So there are some wells in the southern San Joaquin Valley that go out 10,000 feet from their wellhead and can be pretty much any place. And trying to find a map showing the downhill or the downslope path of a well is very difficult or very expensive if you want to try to do it. But the basic element is that mineral resources are a problem. Have the gas wells and gas production cause subsidence or compaction of the soil? Will the future gas production and or carbon dioxide injection cause any changes in the compaction and or the subsidence or uplift of ground through which the tunnels are passing? So there are ways of dealing with it, and DWR doesn't want to touch it because it's very expensive to do it right. And DWR, they don't like to do it right. And basically, whoever's designing the tunnels seems to be a road engineer with very little experience underground. It's all going to be so nice and easy. Tunneling in a delta muck is terrible. It's one of the most expensive tunnelings you can ever do. I have friends in Shanghai who had the same problem. We fortunately in LA had decent ground, very little muck, because we weren't in a delta. Try New Orleans if you want to put a tunnel in. That's really terrible ground. And the delta is also terrible ground. And whoever is doing it, when you tunnel through soft ground and you fix the tunnels to a vertical fixed shaft, you got a problem when the earthquake comes, because the tunnel will wobble all over the ground, underground, but the shaft will remain fixed in place. And what you do is you break the connection between the tunnel and the shaft. The tunnel may survive, but it's where it stops at the shaft. And these comments will be submitted to DWR. Basically, whoever's designing it hasn't designed a tunnel in muck. That's all.
Just wanted to say I shared, I did work with Tom Williams to get testimony, and it was California Water Research that presented his testimony. He was the only tunnel expert to testify in the hearing, and it was invaluable. And I did some blog posts with his testimony, and I just shared them. Thank you.
Paul, would you like to unmute? Paul, who lives in.
Yeah, I was just looking
yeah.
at the, I was just looking at the map, the Dogger map, and from Hood down to Byron Bethany. I mean, they're gonna need like a little, what do you call those things? They're gonna need a sports car sized drill to manage some of those wells down there, out in that area. I'm wondering, I think, and I don't know that much about drilling, but I think I remember Shoshana mentioning something about there's maybe three different ways to get a permit for drilling. Has it, or maybe you only have to go through one agency. There's only one agency you have to go through.
There's safety considerations, and I talked with them. I forget with which agency, I'll have to go back, but there's basically occupational safety, and what they could certify it as gassy or potentially gassy. DWR doesn't want it to be certified as potentially gassy because then they'd have to take a lot of precautions. And so DWR is going to try and pressure them. And I talked with them a while ago. DWR, you've got to understand, is in all these agencies right now, and they're just like come in as the 800-pound gorilla and try and pressure them into not doing adequate supervision.
We have Maureen.
I think I unmuted. Oh, I'll do start video too. This might be a little bit off the wall, but I was part of a group with the Sierra Club called Hack the Bay. And this fellow, he had a boat that gathers green and blue-green algae blooms, and he transforms them into paraffin products, which are usable in many, many forms. It was kind of fascinating. And frankly, I am moved by the background photo that Barbara presented of all that greenness in Stockton. And there's a huge algae issue. I don't know how to, there is technology out there that can assess this. But no one seems to know about it. Just thinking.
Yeah. Dr. Williams.
Yeah, regarding well drilling, number one, CalGEM does a pretty good job on new wells. The real issue that we're finding now that we're starting to ban oil wells in Southern California is that in the Delta, I doubt if they would ever drill a new well, because you can re-drill an existing well casing that is maybe 1,000 feet deep, and then you kick it out and you kick out the drill at 1,000 feet below the surface, and you go to 5,000 feet, but 5,000 feet away from wherever you were. So the first 1,000 feet is usually quite expensive, and if they can find an existing well within 5,000 feet of where they want to put the bottom of the hole in, they'll re-drill. So there is, in fact, a very simple process to CalGEM of re-drilling. So you got to be careful when you use the word drilling and wells and all sorts of things with CalGEM. But they do have a lot of documents available through Well Finder. And if you're worried about any particular well, they can give you all the documents they have. But might say the surface location can be like 200 to 500 feet from wherever they locate it now to where it actually was. So that's one of the reasons why we will be requiring or commenting that DWR must do a aerial photograph reconnaissance of the entire route. Say anything within 5,000 feet of the route needs to be documented by aerial photographs. And aerial photographs in some areas, I don't know the Delta for sure, go back to 1920s. We have 1920s, 1930s aerial photographs of Los Angeles, and the old well derricks show up beautifully on the old Fairchild black and white images. Now it's much better, but it's a matter as to having, might say, a location on the surface may not be what you need. You need to find where the bottom of the hole is rather than top of the hole. Oh, by the way, my first oil well that I participated in was in 1958 in eastern Kansas, and that convinced me to go to college. That's all.
Oh,
I did want to say, I just went through and did a search on my email and I found, so it is Cal OSHA, and it was legislation passed after the Sylmar Tunnel disaster that MWD and all these poor miners, the tunnel construction workers burnt to death. So Cal OSHA requires that classification of tunnels as gassy or potentially gassy before a request for bids whenever possible, and special safety measures if the tunnels are classified as gassy. And so it goes through Cal OSHA, and that was who I was talking to before, but I've been really busy with the climate change. Like Tom, I can send that to you, but it's good. I really want to ask for some help with somebody in following up on that. I think there's a huge safety issue, and if you look at the history, DWR tries to cut corners on cost, and it's really expensive if that strata is declared gassy, and because of all these abandoned wells and they don't know where they are, it probably should be declared gassy.
You know, as a surreal footnote to all of this, in Paul's hometown, my understanding is that right under police headquarters in downtown Oakley, there is a plugged and abandoned dry gas well.
Yeah.
That's how common they are.
Leaking, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that they leak. They're not, Dr. Williams told me they didn't used to plug them very well.
Right. Well, and besides, even state-of-art plugging involves cement casing. My God. I mean, those of us who live, you know, over the Hayward Fault know how much cement, how quickly it cracks, you know, after being poured. You know, it takes just a few months for it to start moving about.
I will say that the new head of the Design and Construction Authority is a geotechnical engineer, and he's way more competent. I mean, the people who were leading the Delta, the consultants that were leading the Delta Tunnel, twin tunnels, were clueless. And so they may have made some progress. They may have done some of this mapping. I don't know. It would be good to go back through the DCA's work, because they actually, Tom Williams said DWR needed to do 2 years of drilling, geotech drilling, before they could even do an EIR. And when they sent the project back, they're now finally doing the EIR, and they moved the tunnels inland. They moved it inland, and part of the issue was it's total muck in the middle of the Delta, and there was no access. There's just these little 2-lane roads and these historic bridges that would fall to pieces if you tried to put all these heavy trucks all over them. And so they literally moved it to the east. I mean, it never wouldn't have even been feasible to construct it, the tunnel where they were originally planning to do it a decade ago. And although they have modern tunnel boring machines, and Dr. Williams can tell you about it, the access, DWR, the Delta-Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, in December of 2018, or I think it was 2019, December of 2019, got tunnel construction companies. They were all ready to go. They had the old water fix thing, and we're just going to do 1 tunnel instead of 2, and we're going to have the 2 intakes and give us a bid. And the tunneling company said, we couldn't even bid on this. There's no, the access isn't feasible. And they said they had to move it. So that's part of the history. That's why it moved inland. And there was a lot of concern about traffic impacts, but the more inland thing is a lot better for the towns on Central Delta because they're not routing so much traffic up and down River Road. I mean, that was going to be a disaster because in times of high water, people have to patrol the Delta levees 24/7, and it would have interfered with that and public safety.
Hmm.
That's one of the things California Water Research really worked on. We work on engineering issues and we have a privilege to work with Tom Williams, but we were the ones who were raising the public safety issues. And we also raised issues with tunneling under the town of Hood. They were going to tunnel right under houses in the town of Hood. And at least for the twin tunnels, we got them to move the route of north intake tunnels from under Hood. They might have put them back. They were very dodgy about it, and I was very frustrated because people wouldn't ask questions about that in the stakeholder engagement committee. But we, given the soft sediments in the Delta, really against tunneling under houses there. I think there's a lot of risk, and DWR just wasn't addressing it. And the thing that's scummiest was they have it set up so the Design and Construction Authority, the agencies have no legal responsibility for the debts of the Design and Construction Authority. So if there is a tunneling disaster, the water agencies that are overseeing the tunneling would say, we don't have any liability.
We don't have any liability.
Yeah, it's the Design and Construction Authority.
On that
Raise
grim
that as
note,
an issue.
yeah.
That it's an issue with the ethics of tunneling. You have to allocate risk.
Let me suggest that we stop the recording